will move. And if you are not, those cases will linger on your docket. And so I'm looking forward to the opportunity to bring best practices to the Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas to make sure that we are not having those small business cases just linger on our dockets. Thank you.
Okay, and I want to thank everyone again for their wonderful answers. And now we're actually going to move on to Barbara Yang. Sorry about that again.
Hi everyone, my name is Barbara Yang and I'm a current senior at Laurel School in Shaker Heights, Ohio, and I'll be asking questions for the Board of Education candidate. So Dr. Christine Collins, please introduce yourself and why you're running.
Hi, thank you so much for having me tonight. I am Christina Collins. I am the candidate for State Board of Education in District 5, which includes Richland, Ashland, Medina, Wayne, and parts of Cuyahoga, Summit, Holmes, and Stark counties. Many people don't know what the State Board of Education is or does. The board approves policies, recommendations, and resources for use in Ohio's schools. They also hire and evaluate the State Superintendent of Instruction, who is over the Ohio Department of Education. Basically, the State Board is a bridge between policy and action in K-12 education in Ohio. So I went into education because when I was younger, I saw firsthand my own family's struggles with education and literacy specifically. I distinctly remember reading my grandfather's mail to him and thinking that it wasn't right that he couldn't read and understand his own mail. I'm now 12 years in the education profession, and I have advocated for public schools throughout my career. I've served as both a high school English teacher and a district administrator as a curriculum director. I also have a superintendent's license, as well as a PhD in curriculum and instruction from Kent State. And I'm a mother of 4 children, ages 11, 10, 4, and 2, and I live with my family in Medina. We are at such an opportune moment in education. Because of the pandemic, we could rethink some of what we've done in the past, including the push to privatize and an overemphasis on testing in Ohio schools. This is why I decided to run for this position. We need more innovative, critical thinkers who care about public education and who want to take advantage of this very weird 2020 to rethink what we've done in the past to better focus on what's best for kids. With your vote this fall, I will advocate for equitable funding, supporting the July State Board's anti-racism resolution, emphasizing mental health and wellness, and decreasing state testing and reliance on the state report card. Again, as your representative, I will bring my background and expertise to these and other important conversations. Thank you again for having me tonight.
Thank you so much. Speaking of racism and sweeping political changes within the system, this is a wonderful segue to my next question, which is, do you believe that public school curriculums need to be revised to teach more about non-European culture, history, and literature? And if so, what would you do to achieve that?
So one of the pieces of the anti-racism resolution adopted by the State Board in July was that the Ohio Department of Education and State Board members would first receive implicit bias training, and then they would review curriculum documents from Ohio. So that would include our standards as well as our model curriculum to look for instances of implicit bias that is included in those documents. Because Ohio is a local control state, ultimately it comes down to a local school board to determine what is actually taught in their districts. But I do agree with that resolution and the efforts to provide the implicit bias training and review those curriculum documents, because as somebody who has worked with them for the last 12 years, I do know that we could do better than what we have in those documents now.
Thank you so much for your insight. And the last question is that there are wide socioeconomic gaps between public schools and wealthy suburbs and in urban areas, which is demonstrated prominently, especially during this pandemic. What do you think can be done to make sure that students receive good education no matter where they live, like including having adequate access to technology and equipment like Wi-Fi and computers?
Well, I think you just hit on one of the biggest equity divides in Ohio right now, which is the technology divide. And we see that in education across the board, but especially in our standardized testing. I think what we really need to get a handle on first is decreasing the amount of standardized tests. Researchers and longitudinal research tells us that those tests are a better indicator of poverty in local communities than they are of actual achievement for students. So the more emphasis we put on the tests, the more our supports, our blame, our conversations are misleading, because we're hammering away at schools whose scores aren't great. We're trying to make them better at enforcing education, when really what we need to be doing is better community support. So really, that's the first conversation, is reframing what we do with standardized tests. The way that we get to the bottom of improving equity is by ending the way that we are measuring student achievement and doing something different. Like I said, we need that creativity and innovation to take us in a different direction right now.
Thank you so much for sharing. Now I'll be moving on to questions for the Supreme Court candidates. Judge O'Donnell, please introduce yourself and why you're running.
Is Judge O'Donnell muted?
Yeah, please unmute yourself.
You mean from your end, you can unmute him too.
Okay. I can only ask it. Can I unmute? Ask to unmute, okay. Not unmute, I can only ask to unmute.
Yeah, Judge O'Donnell may have some technical difficulty. Maybe we move on to next candidate and then come back with him.
Sure, sounds good. I'll be moving on to Judge Brunner. So do you mind introducing yourself and why you're running?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Judge Jennifer Brunner. I'm currently a judge on the Ohio 10th District Court of Appeals, and I have a wide range of experience. I've served as a trial court judge in the Common Pleas Court in Franklin County. I was elected actually 20 years ago and started the Adult Felony Drug Court there, which is called the TIES program, which stands for Treatment is Essential to Success. When I saw the need for some reform in the Secretary of State's office, I was required to actually leave the bench, and I did in order to run for Secretary of State in 2006. And I won that election by 15 points and served from 2007 to 2011. I learned quite a bit about administration of a state agency, then having 200 employees. And during that time, so would you like me to continue, or do you want Judge O'Donnell to go forward?
Yes, continue.
Okay, thank you. After my time in the Secretary of State's office, I did not run for re-election, having run for the US Senate in 2010, but did not make it through the primary. So I have 17 years of private practice experience, and I started my law practice actually in the corner of my bedroom when my children were 7, 4, and 2, and had a focus on election law, which qualified me for Secretary of State. But after returning to private practice, I actually worked overseas for the US State Department, USAID, in Serbia, Egypt, and Sri Lanka. And I have traveled myself to Vietnam, Thailand, Taiwan, and also, as I said, Sri Lanka, because my daughter actually lived in Bangkok for some time. I ran for the court that I'm in 2014 and have been serving since that time, and really felt compelled to run this year because I had decided not to in previous years, because of the chance to make sure that the way we draw our district lines is overseen by a court that looks at it from a fair perspective because of the new formulas we have to eliminate gerrymandering. On the personal side, I have 3 children. My husband and I have been married for 42 years, and I have 6 grandchildren. Their ages 9 to less than 3 weeks. So thank you for having us this evening, and I look forward to your questions.
First of all, congratulations on your grandchild.
Thank you.
Yeah, Asian Americans have been subject to increasing racial bias and targeting in the past few years, especially during this pandemic. So what is your view of the Supreme Court's role in keeping the Ohio court system free from racial bias?
Thank you. I'm very sorry for what's happened since the coronavirus and the way that the administration at the national level keeps referring to it in derogatory terms, because it isn't right. My campaign consultant, who I've had with me for 21 years, is an Asian American, and she is the only woman that I'm aware of that is a statewide political consultant for statewide campaigns, and she's quite amazing and quite effective. In fact, she was my Assistant Secretary of State, especially during the Obama election, which was quite contentious in 2008. So, you know, the systemic racism is actually baked into the criminal justice system. What it requires, and I know this from experience, is actually looking at data so that we can identify where the problems exist, and then we know where we start to work on those problems. Very simply, if you want to manage it, you have to measure it. If you want to measure it, you have to define it. So the Chief Justice and Justice Donnelly on the Supreme Court have moved forward with an initiative to essentially gather data about sentencing, and this is specifically in criminal justice, as well as records of individuals, so that for a particular crime and someone with a particular criminal record, we could overlay demographic data across that record and see if there are disparities, racial disparities, maybe gender, maybe educational, even zip code, or economic disparities, and then devise ways to take that out of the system. I heard earlier tonight, it would be great if we could just kind of stamp it out, but I think this is going to require a lot of unraveling, a lot of sensitivity. The training of the individuals in the system is important, but we also need good leadership, so that once we identify some real problems, that you know, our court's a very diverse kind of home rule system. Not even their computer systems are the same, so it's going to take some very diplomatic efforts on the parts of the justices to work with these judges and their administrations around the state to actually incentivize them to want to make these changes, because it will not be convenient for some, but it will be extremely, extremely necessary for people to have confidence in the judiciary in Ohio.
Thank you so much for your insights. What do you believe is the most significant challenge facing the court, and how can that challenge be addressed?
I will speak in terms of the Ohio Supreme Court. There are some great things that the court has done technology-wise, but you know, for instance, this database that I just talked about is something that was suggested clear back in 1996 in new sentencing laws. It was not mandated, it was suggested as a good idea, and it's taken now 24 years for us to come to the realization that we should have been doing this a long time ago. So I think probably the biggest issue is going to be changing attitudes, educating judges, educating people who work in the court systems, and not just in the criminal justice system, but elsewhere, so that we are focusing on these issues of disparity where the justice system is falling short, and essentially making people want to come together. When I started the drug court in 2004 in Common Pleas Court, one thing we did was we actually cross-trained between the criminal justice community and the treatment community, so that we could that they could show each other that even though they're doing things differently and speaking a different language, they're all working basically toward the same goal of helping people become more whole. And so you know, things like that, you can throw a lot of money at it, but what really makes it work is when people come together and actually solve the problem by listening to each other. And again, it takes good leadership. I look forward to being a leader, working with my colleagues on the Supreme Court to help make that happen. It's important for the well-being of the people of Ohio, and it's important for the rule of law.
Thank you so much for sharing, and thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Now moving on to Judge O'Donnell. Please introduce yourself and why you're running.
Good evening. Thank you for having me here tonight. And in hopes that it's not the wrong time of day to say this, I will say ni hao to everyone on the call. So I'm Judge John P. O'Donnell, and I first started on the Cuyahoga County Common Pleas Court in 2002, and I've served there continuously since 2006. I'm running for the Ohio Supreme Court to bring my broad and I would say nearly unmatched trial court experience to the issues facing the Supreme Court. For example, I have presided over every kind and magnitude of criminal case, from death penalty cases, other murders, rapes, aggravated robberies, down to minor felony drug possession. I have presided over every kind and magnitude of civil lawsuit. For example, multi-million-dollar construction disputes, multi-million-dollar medical negligence, down to a $1,000 or $2,000 civil contract case. The Ohio Supreme Court is charged with deciding cases of public or great general interest. All of these cases tend to begin in the trial court. So I think my experience and perspective from that court will be invaluable in deciding cases as one of 7 justices on the Ohio Supreme Court. I also want this group to know that in addition to my own confidence that I'm a good candidate for this position, the 4 bar associations who have ranked for Judge for Yourself have rated me higher than the incumbent in this race. I also want you to know that 2 bigger newspapers in the state of Ohio, the Cleveland Plain Dealer and the Columbus Dispatch, have endorsed me over the incumbent in this race. And finally, the Ohio State Bar Association has ranked me numerically higher than the incumbent in this race. I mention those things for this reason. Those are individual groups and organizations that do a deep dive into the candidates and do interviews and the like. And they are, as far as I can tell, nonpartisan and without an agenda. And it is, I would say, exceedingly rare. I don't know how often it happens. I think it's rare, though, that all of those people and organizations would rank higher a non-incumbent in a race like this. So I'll be happy to hear the next question.
Thank you. What is your view of the Supreme Court's role, or your role, in keeping the Ohio court system free from racial biases or disparities?
I'll say 2 things to that. Well, 3 things. First of all, I haven't heard much that I disagree with tonight from the other candidates in their responses to the same question. But I would say this. First thing, from the Ohio Supreme Court's perspective, the court has essentially a supervisory role over all the courts in our state. So I would propose that the Supreme Court require every judge in the state of Ohio and key members of the staff for those judges to undertake sophisticated cultural competency training. This is a way of making sure that people are aware of the biases that are latent, and to make sure they are aware of issues that face minorities, whether ethnic, racial, or even economic minorities in the court. So awareness is the first step to improvement as far as I'm concerned. And the second thing, and it might be kind of a small thing, but it would be worth knowing when organizations like yours are having social events, or sometimes you have professional events combined with a social event. And there's nothing like getting to know people in a personal context to bring home the fact that I think somebody earlier said it today, and it is true, that all of us are the same. We all, I think, want mostly the same things for our fellow countrymen and countrywomen. And when you can socialize, when you can meet people on a personal and human level, it just makes that all the more clear, and you can carry that into your business day.
Wonderful. Okay, so this is the last question. What
Okay.
do you believe is the most significant challenge that the court is currently facing, and how would you address that problem?
Well, you know, I'm going to address what I think the most significant legal issue likely to come before the court in the next year or 2 is. By the way, of course, I cannot say how I would decide an issue that isn't before me today. A judge or justice cannot make a pledge or promise of particular performance, but I can comment on the kind of issues the court is going to get. And I would say it is quite likely that late next year, the Ohio Supreme Court is going to be faced with a redistricting decision. Under a recent amendment to Ohio's Constitution, There is a different process for redistricting. It has to be done by, if I remember correctly, September of 2021. And if there is a challenge to the correctness of the new proposed boundaries, that challenge goes directly to the Ohio Supreme Court. And the Ohio Supreme Court will have to decide not what the lines should be. The court won't be able to redraw the lines if it thinks they were badly or poorly or illegally drawn. But the court has to essentially approve of them and has to find that they are sufficiently geographically compact and that they, and I'm paraphrasing here, don't unduly favor or disfavor one side or the other. This will be a novel but hugely important issue taken up by the High Supreme Court. And I think I'm ready to meet the challenge in a way that has no agenda, just the good of the people of Ohio.
Thank you so much for sharing. And once again, thank you so much for all of the candidates that have shared. And I'll be passing my mic on to Catherine Xiao.
Sheshe.
Hello, my name is Catherine Xiao, and I am a junior at Westlake High School. I will be asking questions to the candidates for the Court of Appeals. I would like to start with Judge Groves, and our first question is, could you please introduce yourself and explain why you are running?
And good evening to everyone, and I thank you for the opportunity. I want to commend our moderators. It's exciting to see students with such poise and confidence. So I want to commend the organization for allowing the students to play such a major role in this event. Again, my name is Emanuella, and I have been a judge in the Cleveland Municipal Court since 2001. During the time on the bench, I have been committed to ensuring change in the administration of justice and also helping individuals who come before me to help change their lives for the better. I have created programs to assist people that come before me secure their GEDs, over 600 people. We know, particularly living in an urban area, that the lack of education and crime go hand in hand. And so what better way to help influence and improve our community than to address the deficiencies that come before us in terms of how we can help individuals be better. I also helped when we talk about bail reform and also looking at instilling information and empowering people with information. So I'm convinced if you know better, you do better. When I first got on the bench, I was troubled by the fact that people with minor misdemeanor offenses, which means that the only penalty that they could experience would be a fine, would sit in jail because they failed to appear in court. So I helped create a process that would alleviate the time that people would sit in jail. They would be processed, given an opportunity to plead, and then sent on their way, as opposed to sitting in jail until they would see a judge. Also on the issue prior to the consent decree with the city of Cleveland, I was concerned with the negative interaction between individuals that came before the court and the police. So I helped create a program called Community Orientation Program that would teach individuals their rights and responsibilities when they encounter the police. And we've had hundreds of people go through the program. I'm a graduate of Case Western Reserve University School of Law, and I am very honored to say that I have been able to return to the law school as an adjunct professor. I teach criminal procedure 2, and I've had the privilege of doing that since 2016. I write opinions, not because I have to, but I enjoy writing them. And so the Court of Appeals is really a natural transition of the work that I've already done in the municipal court. And I look forward to serving on the Court of Appeals in order to further my writing and my research. And so that is the reason why I'm looking to work on the Court of Appeals or serve on the Court of Appeals. I've been rated excellent by all 5 bar associations and endorsed by the Cleveland Plain Dealer. I hope that those endorsements, and particularly for people who work in the profession, is a testament to the work that I have done. So I thank you in regards to providing a brief introduction of who Emanuella Groves is. Thank you.
Thank you. And for our next topic, Asian Americans have been subject to increasing racial bias and targeting in the past few years, especially during the pandemic. What is your view of the Court of Appeals' role in keeping the Ohio court system free from racial bias? You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. I think, and when we look at the Court of Appeals, they look at when errors have been created at the trial level. And so the role of the Court of Appeals would be to make sure that people are treated fairly, that errors have not been made because of a person's ethnicity. And particularly, I'm sensitive to that fact. And we know that it's much more difficult to legally demonstrate that there has been discrimination. But being a person of color, sometimes it's like, you know, as they say with not profanity, what is it? With sexually oriented things, you know it when you feel it. And so there's no real definition, but you know it and you experience it. So I would bring that perspective and to ensure that people are treated fairly as it is allowed through the law, and to make sure that those errors don't occur.
Thank you. And for our last topic, what do you think is the most significant challenge facing the court, and how do you plan on addressing that challenge? You have 2 minutes.
I think the most challenging issue, particularly when we look at Black Lives Matter, when we look at the issue of the perception of court and the administration of justice, is that we have to continue to educate in terms of how we reach the decisions. I think that we have to look at if there needs to be a shifting or changing, we need to do that. And I think that as we can instill trust in the administration of justice, and I think that's one, by the decisions that we make. Secondly, by having the access to justice that people can come and see and understand how we make the decisions, and just educating the community. But I think that that is, particularly in this climate, how we can help instill a confidence in our judiciary.
Thank you so much for your insights. I'd like to move on to our next candidate, Ms. Hawkins. Please introduce yourself and explain why you are running.
Good evening, and thank you for this event. My name is Pam Hawkins, and I am a graduate of Cleveland Marshall College of Law. I have been a practicing attorney for 16 years and have been a trial attorney for that entire time. I spent 4 years with the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office. I have been in private practice, spending majority of my time representing the indigent population of Cuyahoga County. And prior to becoming an attorney, I was a social worker. I have a master's in education. I also have a MSSA, which is a specialized social work master's, and I am an independently licensed social worker with supervisor designation. I have 31 years of professional experience. During that time, I have spent almost all of it working with low income and populations that are challenged with accessing services, accessing our systems. I believe that moving to the Court of Appeals from private practice will give me the opportunity to continue ensuring that they are able to access justice. I have appeared before the 8th District Court of Appeals multiple times in the last 16 years, arguing appeals as a prosecutor as well as a plaintiff and defense attorney, ensuring that my clients' access to justice was fair. Thank you.
Thank you. Now for our next topic. Asian Americans have been subject to increasing racial bias and targeting in the past few years, especially during the pandemic. What is your view of the Court of Appeals' role in keeping the Ohio court system free from racial bias? You have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. I believe part of the Court of Appeals' role is to do a careful review of the cases that come before them, looking at the facts, looking at how justice was applied, and if there was any potential for bias. That is one of the factors that is considered in every decision that the court renders. They have to look at, was there bias? And I believe that in order to ensure that that is done fairly and equitably, one of the things that needs to happen is there needs to be, we've heard talk about criminal justice reform, we've heard talk about bail reform, we've heard talk about tracking sentencing. I think all of that needs to be done in order to enable us to have a more transparent and fair system.
Thank you. And for our final topic, what is the most significant challenge facing the court, and how do you plan on addressing that challenge? You have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. I think one of the biggest challenges facing the court right now is, as has been said, is transparency. People don't see, what I'm finding in my experience is people don't understand how the court system works, how the timeframes work, and they need that explained to them. I believe part of transparency is community education, letting the community know and see what it is the court does and how the process works and how it is supposed to work for everyone. And I think if we educate and we provide supports to the people who need it in accessing the courts, we will have a better response from the public.
Thank you so much for your insights. Now I'd like to introduce our final candidate, Judge Headen. Please introduce yourself and explain why you are running. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you so very much. It is a pleasure and an honor to be here in front of you. I am a person who came to the bench in a non-traditional fashion. I did not come up through trial practice. I did not come up as a prosecutor. And I think that is a added diversity to the bench has been a value to the success of the Court of Appeals while I've been there. On a personal level, while I've been a judge, I've rendered over 235 opinions, and absolutely none of them have been overturned by the Ohio Supreme Court. And in that capacity, it's a 100% record. And the reason why I think it's valuable to say that is because I know I stand on the shoulders of many people before me. And I came up in the inner city in Glenville in a place where it was expected, and many immigrant and likewise poor communities know that they have to do twice as good or twice as better as everyone else. And that's sort of how I've taken the Court of Appeals. And indeed, I think 100% record as a judge, being perfect and excellent in every way during that capacity is just the beginnings. Since I've been on the bench, actually, I think that it's important to do more. One of the things that I did early on in new judges school was meet with Justice Mike Donnelly. And we sat there and we said that, we kind of want to make change. And that's something that really just needs to get done sometimes, is that judges need to talk. And maybe that's because of the fact that I didn't come up in the traditional fashion. When we had that conversation, we just started looking for places that needed to be changed. And one of them now that seems like every single judge in the state of Ohio has been on has been the database. That started in a conversation with two people in the room, Justice Mike Donnelly and myself. We looked at where things could improve, and the fact that there is no data on race and length of sentence for people of color after 30 years of trying. Again, I only got on the bench for 2 years, so I did it in 2 years at least, whilst others have said that they've done it in 30 or are about to do it. But I mean, like, there's a fact around that. And so, like, literally what, in answer to, change occurs when we want it to occur. And when it doesn't occur, we need to be able as judges to know and call out sometimes what it is. The institution needs to change. And hopefully as a result of like a couple of actions that two judges took, the institution is changing.
Thank you. Now for our next topic. Asian Americans have been subject to increasing racial bias and targeting in the past few years, especially during the pandemic. What is your view of the Court of Appeals role in keeping the Ohio court system free from racial bias? You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Again, it's been a pleasure to be with all of the various different judges that have been on the bench. I've got a great working relationship with the other appellate judges on the bench and throughout the state now. I think that one of the things that needs to occur in order to facilitate equal justice, which is the fundamental aspect of America, is the fact that we need to be able to quantify it. Obviously, that's something that everyone else has taken on. And because everyone else is taking it on, I'm going to speak to something else that if I'm elected, I will address, and that Mike Donnelly and I have addressed, and that's the Court of Appeals standards of review that needs to be looked at, which again, I think the public has an idea of what judges do, a Court of Appeals judges do. But then in terms of the actual execution of our written opinions, I'm not going to change the law and make the law in my opinions. I'm going to follow the law directly. But when there's an opportunity for me to use my position as a judge to influence a change in the law or policy done some other way, either through friendship or through legislative efforts or whatever, I'm going to take that opportunity to do it. And the appellate review standards need to be looked at just like the data. So both of them will affect the outcome of people of color in particular, but then when that occurs, it affects everybody. That's just equal justice, that's America.
Thank you. And for our final topic, what is the most significant challenge facing the court, and how do you plan on addressing that challenge?
Thank you so much. Again, it is something that I think coming from a non-trial lawyer background per se, I was a corporate lawyer. You know, I perhaps looked to solve problems as much as anything else, in addition to doing a great job as a judge. It's trust. It's trust. We need to make sure that the people of our communities understand who their judges are, what the justice system is, and to be able to make sure that everybody who comes to the court has a fundamental understanding and a belief that this system works. It might not get the result they want, but they have to believe that it's absolutely accurate, that there is no chance that they're going to get something that is unfair. And so when that occurs, as it's been this way for years, many times now, speaking to my community, perhaps, you know, the African-American community particularly, we've got a huge problem. And you need to have people who are sensitive to those kind of issues. So yes, I'm very sensitive to trust. Trust from any kind of background, any kind of community, because like literally we're all in this thing together. Thank you.
Thank you for giving us your insights. Now I'd like to bring the focus back onto Barbara Young.
Hi everyone, I'm Barbara Yang and I'll be asking questions for the incumbent Supreme Court candidates. So first up, Justice Kennedy, please introduce yourself and why you're running.
Good evening and thank you for the opportunity. I'm sorry I'm tardy to the forum. I was very busy earlier today. You know, I began running for the Supreme Court of Ohio in 2011 because I believe that those who serve at Ohio's highest court must be the individuals who are disciplined enough to allow the law to live. I do not have the providence to rewrite the law or legislate from the bench. And I think that I bring that perspective to the court in my philosophy, but also I think my 34 years of diverse service is also a service to serving at the court. I began my career as a police officer in the city of Hamilton, left law enforcement to put myself through law school. I was a private practitioner and I was really a solo practitioner. So I was truly one of those generalists that would do cases in domestic relations, probate, juvenile, the criminal courts. I was a criminal defense attorney, but I also had the opportunity to serve as a part-time civil magistrate for 3 years and be a warrant officer for the county courts. and served for Betty Montgomery as special prosecutor. And I took that knowledge base and became a trial court judge for 13 years, trying my cases every single day. And really then that led me to my 8 years here at the Supreme Court. But it's more than just that. It's more than just judicial philosophy, my experience. It's the things that I've done beyond the bench, because I've looked at cases, not as numbers, but as people. As a trial lawyer, I literally worked and partnered with juvenile court. I wanted to stop the recidivism of juveniles into the juvenile system. I knew that if my clients ended up in the Department of Youth Services, percentage-wise, they were more likely to come back into the system and or go on to the adult system to be institutionalized. With a social work degree as my undergraduate degree, it really helped me use those tools from college and my work experience to help build a program called Compass Point for juvenile court. It was the same thing I did when I was in private practice. I advocated for adult criminal defendants who needed mental health services and substance abuse on the trial court bench. When economic downturn happened and I had a non-support docket of 72 people in front of me, I could have just said, here's an entry, please, go get a job. I didn't. I recognized the problem that we were having economically through no fault of theirs, partnered with Jobs and Family Services, hired a counselor, had someone meet with them, and then also make sure that they were engaging that. As the Supreme Court, I actually do my Lean Forward initiative to make sure that our veterans are finding mental health and substance abuse treatment instead of a jail cell.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and perspectives. Now, my question is, Asian Americans have been subject to increasing racial bias and targeting within the past few years, which is especially during this pandemic. And what is your view of the Supreme Court's role in keeping the Ohio court system free from racial biases?
I believe that this is one of the largest challenges that we face from the perception perspective. This conversation about implicit bias and whether it exists or not. To me, we have to be cognizant of that perception. We have to really self-examine. So think about implicit bias and how do you disrupt it? Number one, you acknowledge it, you seek diversity, you make sure that you are looking at all aspects of the system. That's what I did at the trial court, and that's what we do today. And then think about this. Once you start doing that and seeking diversity and reaching out to include those groups that are feeling excluded and being part of the conversation and the answer. And lastly, there are times that we have to recognize that in order to ensure that there is not implicit bias, that we are limiting ambiguities and also limiting discretion. So in the trial court, when we had issues for service, making sure that pro se litigants had access to the courts, we created the form carousel so they could come in. Here was the instruction sheet. If they didn't understand it because we were using too much legalese, we would rework the form. We converted our forms from English to Spanish and other languages. So we helped them. We had a workshop center for them to actually then be able to sit down, fill out their paperwork. It's not too unlike my time in working with the veterans population of the Supreme Court. Really training judges, sheriffs, probation, parole officers about how to do that outreach to make sure we're connecting with them, to make sure we're getting mental health and substance abuse treatment, and that we're recognizing the invisible wounds of war, PTSD, mental health issues, depression, traumatic brain injury.
Yeah, thank you so much for recognizing many challenges that face the court. However, what do you believe is the most significant challenge that the court is currently facing, and how would you address that challenge?
I think the most critical thing courts are facing really come down to people. It is the perspective of those who walk through our system. From being an attorney, 13 years on the trial court, in my 8th year as a justice, it still comes down to perception. When we change court models in the past, we looked at business models. So when we were looking at increasing the efficiency of the domestic relations court, I was running a Six Sigma program. That was great for inner working. That was great for what we were doing and how we were getting a case through the system, making sure that we were making the most of time. But what about the people coming through our system? What do they think? To me, the biggest issue, I think, is this issue of procedural fairness. It is a project that is being looked at in California statewide. It's a project that was looked at and is being done in Michigan. And really, it's how do you feel when you've come through our system? Did you feel respected? How were you treated? Was there neutrality? Did you feel neutrality? It's one thing for me as a judge to say I was neutral, fair, and impartial, but that's just my perspective. What's your perspective on it? Also, when you're looking at those two things, there's a trust issue. In developing that trust, people who trust that things were neutral, that they were treated with respect, more likely to actually adhere to their court orders. And then lastly, when it comes to all of that, in that neutrality, trust, and fairness is the perception of their voice. Did they feel like they were heard? So many times with pro se litigants when I was in the trial court or in current meetings is that ability that they feel like they had that voice. They were able to express what was going on. All combined with that, I think we all have an obligation to look at these critical issues and ensure that it's not just what we think, it's what the people who access our courts truly think where we are as a system. Thanks so much for your time. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you for your time and thank you for attending the forum. Now, moving on to our final candidate of the night, Justice French. Please introduce yourself and why you're running.
Well, good evening. Thanks so much for having me, and I apologize for being late. I really appreciate this opportunity and the interest of this organization to get involved in the campaigns. I am running to continue the work that I've been doing on the bench now on the Ohio Supreme Court for the past 8 years. During that time, it has been my privilege to serve the state of Ohio. I have cast thousands of votes and I have approached each one in an unbiased and impartial way. I think judges have to be umpires. We have to call balls and strikes and not bring our own personal perspective into the conflicts that we hear. But I also think that although our judicial philosophy is so critically important, and certainly the cases that we decide every day are critically important and meaningful for the state of Ohio, what I do off the bench can be just as meaningful. I think that every judge in the state of Ohio has a duty, an obligation to make the judicial system better. And I'm proud of the reforms that we've made at the Ohio Supreme Court over the past 8 years. Many of them have focused on access to justice, something that I have used my voice as a justice to make better, to make reforms to ensure that everyone has equal access to the court system. If they can't afford a lawyer, they still need to, still need legal services. And so it's been important, I think, to reach out to those underserved populations. You know, I've heard a lot of comments tonight about the perception of inequality within our judicial system. And I heard Judge Headen talk about the uniform sentencing database that he has proposed and the Sentencing Commission has proposed. And I agree with that proposal. I think that we need to do better with respect to that perception of inequality in our judicial system, but we also need to modernize some of our courts. We need to provide more resources to our courts. There's so much more that can be done, and I look forward to doing it in the next term.
Thank you so much for sharing. And on to the next question. What is your view of the Supreme Court's role or your role in keeping the Ohio court system free from racial biases?
Well, I think the Ohio Supreme Court has a critical role to play in the perception of bias in our judicial system. You know, let's just be clear. There is no room for racism in the state of Ohio. There is no room for racism in the Ohio judicial system. But one thing we don't have is information about the racial biases and racial disparities within particularly our criminal justice system. So I think if we pursue the database that so many of the candidates have talked about, that's one way that we can bring transparency to the judicial system. But I also want to approach it from a different angle, and that's from a leadership angle. With respect to getting more Asian Americans in our legal profession. You know, you can't become a judge unless you're a lawyer first. So I'm proud to say that of my 3 law clerks, one of them is a first-generation Asian American. And I think we can do better with our leadership programs. It's something that I've been a part of in many different ways and would be happy to partner with this organization to see if we can do more, more partnering between the Ohio Supreme Court and the Asian American legal community. Let's get more Asian American lawyers to become Asian American judges and have greater diversity in that respect in our Ohio judiciary.
Thank you so much. And now moving on to my final question. What do you believe is the most significant challenge that the court is currently facing, and how would you address that challenge?
Well, I think so many of us tonight have talked about the need for transparency. You know, we've talked about that perception of inequality, which is completely unacceptable to have that sort of a perception out there. So I'll talk about a couple other priorities that I think we have to focus on. One is efficiency. I think we need greater efficiency within our court system. I've never heard anyone say that the court system is too fast. Instead, I hear a lot of complaints from lawyers and clients saying it just takes too long to get justice. I think we need to focus on efficiency at the Ohio Supreme Court, at our courts of appeals, and our trial courts. But finally, I think we also have to think about resources for our courts. You know, the pandemic, the shutdown has really focused in the need to modernize our court system in Ohio. Our trial courts in particular have been so innovative and creative. They have done a wonderful job of meeting the needs of the public at the same time trying to address the virus and the limitations that it imposed on us. The Ohio Supreme Court provided millions of dollars in grants for new technology. And I think it's an exciting time for the court system. And I'd like to see us continue that modernization with new technologies so that we can keep this technology, keep the justice system moving, but also make sure that our local courts have all the resources that they need to meet the needs of their local communities. So thank you again for having me tonight. I appreciate the efforts of this organization to inform voters about this important election. I'm Judi French, and it's been my honor to serve you as a justice for the past 8 years.
Thank you so much for bringing attention to all of these really important issues. And once again, thank you to all of the candidates for attending this forum, and I'll be passing the mic back to you, Min.
Thank you, Barbara. I think we still have some time. Hong, did you pick up any question from the chat room to ask?
So far, there is no question yet.
Okay, so do you have a question?
That's you're putting me on the spot. I did not at this point.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah. So that's fine. I want to congratulate all the candidates and thank everybody for this successful event. At the end, I would like to ask Vincent Wang, Apapa Ohio Chair, to close the forum. He provided great support for this event. Vincent.
You mean, do you mind if I ask one question?
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. Yeah.
My question is for Judge. For the judge that Judge Headen, you talk about that it's important to connect data, and you talk about how in the past, I think you said 30 years, there had been no data connected. So connecting data is the first step. What would you envision once you connect the data? What would you do with the data?
In terms of, thank you for asking the question. So the process has been a long one, obviously, and in 1994, Judge Ron Adrian chaired something called a Racial Fairness Task Force that looked at it and went around the state and did a comprehensive study of the court system and fairness and equality. And the thing that really stuck out was that they really couldn't do their job well because there was no comprehensive data collection in the state of Ohio. That was 1994. And since then, there have been a number of other different task force, great attorneys, great judges who have called out for data on the real issues of equality. Because in essence, how can you choose and know if there is inequality without actually collecting data on those very issues? It's a complex issue. I mean, obviously there are questions of resources. There's questions relating to the timing, the disparate nature of all of our court systems talking on different technology platforms. But in essence, this is 2020. And we have received in America more in terms of data and technology in the last 5 years than in the last 25 years before that. So the question at times, and I'm so pleased with the chief and all the judges on this call who have stepped in and have embraced it, because sometimes, just you lose track of time. And that's, I think, a large part of what can happen when you're busy with so many other things. So I have no doubt, although I think we need to be diligent because, again, it's so easy for the quote unquote system to lose track of things. But I have no doubt that we're all on the same page and that this data will get collected. It can be collected today, but it's not comprehensively collected, and it's not available to the public in a comprehensive way, which is just as important. You need to know, as Asian Americans, that you can take a look and see by race that, like, Asian Americans are going to get the same treatment no one's talking about a judge having taking away discretion of a judge, but you need to have the data in front of you to know whether or not you are receiving a disparate sentence from other people of other races, for example. And that's just one portion of the data that's available. There's data that can be used to enact different policies. The costs of the system are related to it. I mean, taxpayer, we spend upwards of $20,000 per person on felony incarcerations. That's the cost of a college education. Do we want to know whether or not somebody is like sentencing someone for 10 years versus like 2 years for everybody else? Well, that 8 years is $160,000 of taxpayer dollars. It is just really something that the public and the other judges need to know. And I think that, the quote unquote obviousness of some of the things that data will provide is one of the reasons why I think so many people are embracing it now.
I'd like to jump in on that, if I may. I realize the question was asked of Judge Headen, but I really believe that there is current data across Ohio that is accessible from different forms. The Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections, ODRC, we know that right now, sitting in Ohio's prisons, there are 47,000 prisoners across our system. Of that, 21,000 are Black. That's 45% of the prison population, but they're only 19% of our population. And if you look at the biggest counties with the highest population of Blacks, Cuyahoga is number one with 30%, then Franklin at 25, then Cincinnati at 22. And then you have Lucas and Mahoning. You already have the numbers through these systems, but then you also have an organization like CareSource. CareSource, who is the largest provider for Medicaid clients, they are tracking jail population and when clients hit jail population and why. And what they're seeing across their system is 7,000 of their system clients will end up in a jail cell at least once. 3,000 go back multiple times. Now they're looking at that jail system to say, as I've had that conversation with jail care source, is they want to start partnering with the criminal justice system because they know when their clients go back. And usually it's someone who has mental health or substance abuse treatment issues. So I'm working with care source to develop a county pilot project of having somebody who, when they're running a full detention facility, someone's there to connect with that individual as they're going back out into the public, whether that's they've been released on bond or whether that's they have been released after serving a sentence. So they want someone to be reconnecting them because it's them falling off the eligibility status and being connected into the care source system that causes them to have delayed treatment. But if you go back to our prison numbers, right now pending in the General Assembly, and the thing that people don't talk about, we are not a unified court system. California is. So if the California body who controls all the courts decides we're going to start this policy and we're going to implement it, that's a drive down system. We have 88 castles in Ohio. That's how many counties there are. So each county runs their court system independently of each other. That's why this question of proportionality and the need for data exists. But right now in the General Assembly, there is legislation pending that I've had multiple discussions with the representatives about what that's going to look like. And for them, trying to collect data in all 88 counties, because as Judge Headen said, sentencing in Ohio is individualized. Judges do not have independent control. We don't decide what behavior is a crime. We don't decide what degree of a sentence or degree of a crime it is, whether it's a misdemeanor, whether it's a felony, whether it's an F1 or an F4 or an M1 or an M4. We don't have control over that. That's all the General Assembly. So when they're looking at this model, they're also going to have to take a look at where are they in the criminal sentencing statutes, because they're the ones who prescribe the penalties for crimes. So they touch all three markers of this. Data for me comes down to collecting it in a pilot project and having that discussion with others, having the discussion of maybe we should be collecting it in the top 5 counties where you have the highest Black population, since that's the highest number in prison. Maybe we should be doing 2 rural counties, 2 medium-sized counties, and 2 of the larger urban-sized counties, so that you have a cross-section of what's happening sentencing. That can inform the General Assembly. But in the end, General Assembly is going to have to address this issue of what is the appropriate sentence for nonviolent offenders. And if we in Ohio or across the nation have decided that nonviolent felony substance users or nonviolent misdemeanor substance abuse users, that we need more treatment, then we need to look more at problem-solving courts. Because remember, in the 1980s, we had the war on drugs. Everybody was lock them up. All of the sentencing structures went through the roof because we were going to be tough on that crime. In the 1990s, it was courts that saw the enlarging dockets of substance abuse users. And what did we do? We were the one that created the problem-solving courts, whether that was drug treatment, mental health treatment, a dual diagnosis, mental health and substance abuse. You see it now in the catch court. I did it in the trial court for non-support. Those kind of ideas and putting people first and trying to, what I say, peel back the onion and getting to what is the core problem happening with this individual. Because oftentimes I find that criminal behaviors is just a symptom of a greater problem for the person. Care source sees it in the fact that all of their clients who are coming back into the system, according to the care source representative I'm working with, is really connected to mental health issues and substance abuse. Do you need all 88 counties to try to drill into this? No, I don't think you do. I think the General Assembly is on the right track for looking at a pilot project. They do a pilot project in Seneca County that the General Assembly authorized. It's a 5-year project where the Court of Common Pleas, General Division, and the Municipal Court are now together in their problem-solving court for substance abuse. They're using one set of service. In other words, the whole team comes together, and anybody who's on for substance abuse treatment and is going through the drug treatment court, they go to one holistic court. Those are the solutions that I believe we're going to find. But we have to have the conversation with the General Assembly as well. They must be part of it, because in the end, it is the General Assembly. It's our representative voice that decides what is a crime, what is the degree of crime, and what is the appropriate sentence for that crime. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Justice Kennedy, and a lot of great insights.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I have a few questions I wanted to ask, but unfortunately, we are running out of time. We are 4 minutes over, you mean? And also, I know a few people who had questions, they were not able to make it. And since we have recorded the event, and so we'll make the recording available online. And so other people who didn't get a chance to come tonight and will watch it. And so this is the 4th candidate forum in this year, organized by APAPA, WCCA, OCA, and a few other partner organizations across Ohio. So we had 2 events in Columbus, 1 in Cincinnati, and we'll make all the recordings available so we can ask the community to watch and engage, and also if they have questions, we'll make sure we funnel the questions to all of candidates that is relevant. And definitely, this is a very insightful conversation tonight, and especially the candidates. We always admire you having a commitment to run for office and also commit to public service. I know especially for judicial candidates, Board of Education candidates, usually you don't get a lot of exposure as other more like other type of candidates, partisan candidates do. And we appreciate your commitment to public service, and also you devote energy to this. And you could have done other things, and like either get reputation or economic status and so forth, but you chose to do this. And like Yumin said, we congratulate you for going this far, and also congratulate you for your distinguished service to our community, to our Ohioans. And we wish you best of luck. And definitely we are looking forward to having more conversations with you, especially we hope you can hire some of our interns like Grace, Catherine, and also Barbara tonight, and intern or clerks. And so hopefully we can talk to you more soon. Thank you so much. And also obviously thanks for our organizers and also our youth leaders for putting together this event. Thank you so much for our audience. And we are looking forward to engaging in such kind of conversations more. And also for the audience, make sure you watch the videos. If you have questions you didn't get a chance to ask, and also make sure you make your plan to vote if you have not done that already. And if you have questions, either ask APAPA at ohio@apapa.org, or go to the Ohio Secretary of State website, voteohio.gov. And looking forward to talk to you soon. Have a good night.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.